to give a big thank you to my wife, Tiffany, who is patiently running the show behind the scenes, keeping the hamsters running, to Brenna, our platform leader, and to Margot, our performer. We are so grateful for them and their patience. And thank you all for your patience. You know, it's kind of like we were talking about last week. Last week, we were talking about this idea of who moved my cheese. Well, I had cheese here this morning and I turned around and someone took my cheese. And that's just seems to be how it's working. And if you recall last week, we talked about this idea of anxiety. When anxiety starts, or anger or frustration, or any of those words, that feeling frazzled, feeling fear, any of those things start to well up within us, our tendency as human beings is to push it down and to push it away and to say it's not happening, just push on through it. Well, that's where I was at the beginning of the week last week. And I have to tell you, if you recall, the lesson was, you can't look at the meaning, you can't look at even the data. Why is this happening? Isn't helpful to us, as David Hawkins told us. We have to just simply be with the energy. So I was with the energy this last week. I allowed that anxious energy. And, I think the whole world was anxious. Well, at least our country was very anxious this last week, because we were coming onto a time when our shelter in place here in California was coming to an end, and some people were lifting it or phasing through, and we weren't sure what we were going to do in California. And so everybody's anxiety starts to rise when we start to wonder about what's going to happen, what's the unknown out there. And that's the natural instinct. So when we're with that, and if we allow that energy to flow, as David Hawkins said, it's like opening the barn door to let the energy out. But when you open the barn door, all of the animals rush out. Every one of them, from all of those past wounds, come up. And what happens, that's okay, as long as you don't make any meaning of it. As long as you don't try to push it away or try to push the animals back in. Allow that frenetic energy to flow out, but don't give it any meaning. And that's where I forgot this last week, because when you get frustrated, you start giving meaning to it. Oh, it's because of this, or oh, it means I'm not doing the right thing, or oh, it means this or that. And that just throws fuel on the fire. So I have to tell you, the talk of the title today is F-Balm, the F-Bomb. Now, fortunately, through all of this, if you've been following me on social media, you know that I'm going through several classes with Martha Creek, doing as I call it, Martha Creek University, or my Martha Creek Intensive. And there's one group that we meet with that's just all ministers, and all of the ministers were feeling this anxiety. And I'm not going to say that any F-bombs were dropped during that Zoom call, and I certainly won't name any names except for me. But at the end of the call, Martha said, I dare you to have your title be F-Bomb. And if you do, have your resume together. So we got both things covered. The other class, the next class that I was taking with her, was on the Beatitudes. And it was an awakening, because I've read this passage in the Bible. It's from Matthew 5. It's part of the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, it leads into the Sermon on the Mount, and I've read it many times. And but as of most people, in fact, this is probably the most recognized passage in the Bible. Everyone knows about the Beatitudes. Now, if you're like me, your first inclination is to think, blessed are the cheesemakers. What, the cheesemakers? Well, you can't take it literally. It's really about all producers of dairy product. Anyways, I digress. Monty Python aside. That's how we look at it. We look at it from the perspective, I think most people look at it from the perspective of, if you're in this way, you're blessed. But they don't truly understand the spiritual meaning behind it. And I think that's where this class reminded me of the true spiritual meaning of the Beatitudes, and allowed me to get back into them and use them and to embrace them and to allow them to flow over me, so that I can move through that period of anxiety. And then they're like a warm blanket that we can put over us if we're looking at it from the right perspective. You see, the Beatitudes are really, they are a prose poem that Jesus led off with. And they are not simple statements, but rather they're a general summary of Jesus's teachings. You might think about the eightfold principles in Buddhism as being very similar. This is Jesus saying, here's a way in which we can express and experience this divine essence that's within us. I'd like to read a little bit from the book by Emmett Fox. Now, Emmett Fox was a New Thought luminary. He was a minister and author, founder of the Divine Sciences, and he wrote this book called The Sermon on the Mount. And it takes a different look at both the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. And here's what he had to say about Jesus, and the reason he used this particular poem at the beginning of his service, of his sermon. Jesus concerned himself exclusively with the teaching of general principle. These general principles always had to do with mental states, for he knew that if one's mental state was set right, everything else must be right too. Whereas if these things are wrong, nothing else can be right. The idea here is that we need to instill within us an attitude, the right attitude of mindfulness, that right attitude around our life. And when we do that, then we're able to live more according to our spiritual nature. And that's the whole theme for May. Really, it's this theme of beingness. It's this theme of really living into our spiritual nature, really living into what in Unity we call that Christ potential. Now that word may have some feelings for you, and you might think of it as the divine spark or the light within you, or even just your higher consciousness. Living into that space where we are looking at life from a more holistic standpoint, from a standpoint of spirit, from a standpoint of that God presence expressing in, through, and as us. Jesus once said, of course, actually Paul said, reiterated this concept of this transformation of your mind when he said, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Get our mind, our thoughts into alignment with spirit, so that when the equipment fails, when the meeting doesn't start off right, when we can't get to our spiritual center, we can't even get to see our grandchildren or our parents. There's something within us that is feeling that, like that cheese has been moved. In that moment, when we're feeling that anxiety, is the perfect time for transformation. Because here's the thing. Transformation, when that occurs, there is a shift within you. There is a change of your belief system. There is a change of your outlook on life. And that change, in that whenever something like that changes, whenever that crystallized thinking begins to crack, there is discomfort. Transformation is the process of moving from one state of being or state of mind, state of consciousness, to a higher state of consciousness, to a higher awareness, a higher understanding of something. And in that shift, there is discomfort. And in that shift, those old beliefs fight to stay alive. Those old beliefs are it's what we might call the enemy, right? That's our own belief system that's holding on to those error thoughts. And when we shift from those error thoughts, comfort and transformation just don't go hand in hand. Comfort comes later, after the transformation, after you started to embody some of these teachings and express your beingness within these teachings. And so it's important to know that transformation, that renewing of our mind, really comes with it comes discomfort. With it comes a willingness to let go of some things, to create a space in our thoughts, in our mind, create a space so that we can realize a greater expression of that divine plan, a greater expression of that spiritual light that's within you, to shine your light just a little bit brighter, to allow God to be God in you, to allow God to flow in, through, and as you, allow that divine wisdom to flow. But we can only do that if we shift our consciousness just a little bit, because that journey is ongoing. If God is infinite and everywhere present, and our potential is infinite and everywhere present, we're going to have little steps along the way. And each little step brings us closer to realizing and understanding our true spiritual nature. Each little step gets us to a point where we can see and feel a little bit more of that innate joy that's within us, just wanting to get out, that divine love, that harmonizing power of God that flows through us, just itching to get out. And sometimes it's that itching that we get frustrated with. So the Beatitudes are a way in which that we can use them, because as general principles, the point here, I believe, I think Monty Python had one thing right. It was not to take it so literally. It wasn't so much the cheesemakers. It's when you have that state of consciousness, when you have that state of mind where you're living from that idea. So if we look at the Beatitudes from that perspective, and we look at that attitudes, in fact, the invitation for the class was to rewrite the Beatitudes from our own perspective, because that's how we bring them alive for us. That's how we make them real in this day and time. That's how we take these wisdom teachings from thousands of years ago and make them alive and real today. So this is our invitation today. Will be our practice, if you choose to accept it, is to take two of the Beatitudes. We're going to talk about two today, and we'll talk about two for the next few weeks. And each week to take that and to really consider what it might mean to you, to take it into your own time of prayer, your own time of discernment and meditation, so that you can have a deeper experience of that wisdom and see how it shows up for you. So here's an example. The first beatitude are, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now I'm going to pull from another book here. It's the Prayers of the Cosmos, meditation on the Aramaic words of Jesus, translated with commentary by Neil Douglas Klotz. So this is a wonderful book, because what Neil is doing is looking at it again from the original language that Jesus spoke and looking at it differently. Over the years, these words have been translated, but our meaning of those words have changed. How many of us have a different view of this idea of God than we did when we were growing up? Instead of this being out there somewhere judging us and guiding the way we live, it's that loving presence that lives in, through, and as us. It's that presence that's everywhere present in all people, in all things. It's the constant that's always there. It's the unfailable truth, the law of principle, the principle of omnipotence, that is, and the principle of wisdom. It's the allness of it all. I love Meister Eckhart, who says, God is, I don't think this is Meister Eckhart, I think this is someone else, but God is that presence whose circumference is nowhere and whose center is right where you are. You are in the center of God always. You are always present to that divine energy. And so all we need to do is open up to it. Now, in the Aramaic, there's some translations that we can look at that might be a little bit different than what we're used to. For example, the words blessed can often take on the connotation of happy, being happy, having that sense of joy, having that sense of contentment. So feeling contented. So if I'm contented when I'm poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, poor in spirit has another translation in Aramaic that can connotate the idea of being humble. So being less ego-driven, being less judgmental, being less driven by pride, and just allowing our ego to be in service to that higher consciousness. That's the idea of being humble, of allowing our ego to just sit back and say, okay, what's my next step? What's mine to do? And listening to that still small voice and then making that step, taking that next step of action. So poor in spirit could mean that idea of being humble. And when you're humble, yours is the kingdom of heaven. Now, in Unity, of course, we believe that the teachings say that the kingdom of heaven is a state of consciousness. It's when we are aligned with that divine essence within us. It's not something that happens after we die. Rather, it's here and now and present when we are aligned in our thoughts, our words, and our actions with that higher consciousness, and with that divine potential, with that Christ potential within us. So when our ego takes a step back, then our Christ consciousness is able to come forward. And we're able to live and express from that perspective. And ego is able to express itself in service to that higher consciousness. And that's what I take away from this particular saying. So when I took it into my time of prayer and time of discernment, time of meditating on it, so that I can really become mindful of it and allow the wisdom to come up within me, here's the affirmation that I came up with. Now I brought it into a present tense because I'm using it as if it's my consciousness. And that's the whole point of it, is how can we use it within us? So my affirmation became, I am blessed by letting my ego express in service to spirit. For mine is the expression of Christ consciousness. And again, allow it to be your words. Maybe it's mine is the expression of my higher consciousness. Maybe it's mine is the expression of my highest good. Mine is the expression of love and kindness, of compassion, of a willingness to be here for other people. When I let my ego take a back seat to things, then I'm able to move forward with it. When all the equipment starts to fail, or something wasn't checked, or something wasn't plugged in right, or whatever the process may be, the blame and shame, ego takes over, pride takes over, the judgment takes over. But if we allow that ego to just sit back and say, peace, be still, we are then able to move from that higher awareness. We're then able to seek the solutions present, like AirPods on a different computer. We're able to move through the situation without feeling so diminished. We're able to bring a greater sense of peace and presence to those around us. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The second beatitude is, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Now, certainly you can look at that from my perspective of mourning. And whenever my ego is in charge and things aren't going right, I'm mourning. Whenever I'm attached to the outcome, or I'm attached to how things are done, and it doesn't go that way, my cheese gets moved. That's a form of mourning. As well as if we have something that's happened in our life that we didn't want, that we didn't expect, a big shift in our life. Many of us are feeling a shift in this time because it's becoming personal. This idea of the coronavirus affecting our friends and family is becoming a reality. And many of us are experiencing that sense of loss. So the full point is, remember, it's okay to mourn. It's okay to be in those feelings. Try not to give any meaning to it. Just allow those feelings to flow. The idea of mourning in Aramaic can be something that is a longing, a deep longing for something, a deep yearning for something. And I think that deep yearning that's consistent within all human beings is that there's a deep yearning for greater understanding of that greater power, a greater understanding of that which breathes me, which is my own breath, which allows my breath to flow through me. A greater understanding of how that loving presence, that divine energy flows through us. And we yearn for that. And so when we yearn for that, when we put that idea of knowing our oneness, of knowing how we can show up just a little bit more compassionately, just a little bit more nice, just a little bit more less frazzled, less frustrated, less fearful, drop all those F-bombs and allow this affirmation to be the balm, the healing balm, the balm that heals your thoughts, your words, that balm that heals your soul, the balm that allows you to live more into the expression of your own being. We are comforted. We are comforted when we return from wandering. We are comforted when we are united with divine love, when we are united to each other with love and compassion, when we feel that inner continuity, that inner unity, that inner sense of oneness. Now, when I took this into my time of discernment, understanding and looking at it from that perspective of, when do I mourn and how do I mourn and why am I mourning? When I'm looking at the meaning and I decide I can let go of that meaning a little bit, this is the affirmation that came. I am blessed when I accept my fears, feelings, and foibles. I am blessed when I accept my fears, feelings, and foibles. That's that sense of inner vulnerability. We're being vulnerable with ourselves. We're being authentic with ourselves. This is where I'm at. And when I can accept myself in that state, I experience self compassion and self acceptance. No longer am I trying to push away all of these fears and foibles. No longer am I trying to keep the animals back in the cage. Let the animals go. Let that energy go so that you can create that space within you so you can then breathe again. When we let go of those fears and just allow them, acknowledge them and accept them and saying, here's the fear. Here's my frustration. Here's my frenetic energy. Here's my foibles, all of those F-bombs. And just accept those and allow them to flow through us without any attachment so that we can make space for a greater understanding. And in that accepting, I experience a sense of self-compassion. I experience a self-acceptance, a sense of self-acceptance. And when I'm experiencing self-acceptance and self-compassion, when I'm experiencing that divine gift from God, that expression of that flow of love, that comforting harmony within me, when I accept that, I can accept that in others, and I can see that in others. So I become more accepting of other people's fears, foibles, frenetic energy, their frustrations. I become more compassionate with others' F-bombs, and I can send them that blessing. And this is the idea of blessing is that we're sending somebody our energy. That's something that we do for each other. We can send that energy to each other so that we can be healed, so that we can be uplifted, so that we can be connected to each other, and that we can know that we are here as a beneficial presence for each other. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. I invite you to take these two affirmations and think about what it means to you. Think about creating your own affirmation in your own words, something that's meaningful to you that can help you move through this idea of separation and live more from that sense. How would you show up in life differently? What would your life be like if you lived more from that beingness that's within you, being that true self, allowing ego to take that back seat and allowing your divine nature to flow forward? What would your life be like? What will your family be like? What will your friends be like? What would life be like if you were able to transform yourself by the renewing of your mind, gently, effortlessly, easily, just comforting yourself with self compassion and self acceptance? Let's take that into our time of meditation and prayer. And as we do, I invite you to take a nice, deep, cleansing breath. Allow that feeling of love to well up within you. I invite you to close your eyes if that feels comfortable, or simply soften your gaze as we close our attention from the outer and move to the inner realm of divine love, the inner realm of peace, the inner realm of our divine light. With each breath, we move more deeply into this sense, knowing that whatever is happening around us, we have the spiritual energy within us, the divine energy that flows in, to, and through us and as us, flowing through each one of us now. Let us become mindful of our breath, As we breathe in, allow yourselves to be breathed by the breath of God. Allow that spiritual energy to flow forth as you breathe out, to surround yourself, to embody yourself in divine love, divine light, in self-compassion, in self-understanding. We breathe in divine love. We breathe out peace. We breathe in divine wisdom. We breathe out words of kindness. We breathe in divine peace, divine understanding, and we breathe out compassion. In the stillness, in the silence. From this higher state of awareness of our oneness with the divine, with God, with spirit, I affirm I am blessed by letting my ego express in service to spirit. For mine is the expression of the Christ consciousness. I am blessed, accepting my fears, feelings, foibles. For I experience self-compassion and self-acceptance. And from this sense of beingness, of allowing myself to be that flow of life, that flow of energy that I am meant to be, I extend this love to everyone in our spiritual community, everyone in my family and friends, everyone in the Bay Area, in the California, in the country, everyone in the world, wherever you are right now, wherever you're experiencing, send your light, your love, your wisdom out now. See the world enfolded in divine love. See the world enfolded in compassion and kindness. And for this beingness of our divine potential, we are joyfully grateful. We are richly, richly blessed. And we say, thank you, thank you, thank you, Spirit. And so it is. Amen. Well, with a nice deep cleansing breath, I invite you to return your attention to this space, to this time, to open your eyes when you're ready, and to just allow that feeling of love, of self-compassion to be within you. Allow that feeling of self-understanding and compassion for others to be radiating from you. Allow that divine love and your light to shine just a little bit brighter today.